The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment repeals Section 115 of the Clean Air Act. This vital amendment protects the autonomy of the states over their own energy sectors by ensuring that unelected, unaccountable EPA bureaucrats cannot seize control over these vital industries under the guise of emissions reductions. The Constitution clearly reserves this power to the states, and it's long overdue that we bring federal policies back in line with the very Constitution that we swear an oath to. Section 115 gives EPA the authority to impose emission reductions on the states if the administrator finds, based on the word of some international organization, just based on their good word, that American air pollution endangers the public health and welfare of another country. Imagine we could do that to China, and the administrator determines that that country will lower their emissions a commensurate amount. Put a different way, Section 115 allows the EPA to rely on the credibility of the same international elites who misled us about COVID to force our constituents to change every aspect of their lives because some European nation thought it would be great to do the same thing. And now we would have to do the same thing. This is no longer a hypothetical. Since President Biden re-entered the Paris Climate Agreement, it can be argued that these conditions have been met and EPA can immediately impose devastating requirements, as it was argued when the Obama administration first entered the agreement. Subjecting such an important sector of our economy to the whims of foreign bureaucrats is downright reckless and hands U.S. sovereignty over to a foreign ideologue. Not even foreign governments, just foreign bureaucrats. Removing the broadly written language in Section 115 is the only way to prevent the delegation of nearly unlimited power over state energy sectors to the EPA bureaucrats and removes the ability of international organizations to meddle in our energy sector. It is vital that we prevent this federal power grab before it imposes devastating economic consequences by empowering the states to meet the needs and interests of their own citizens. Language to prevent the use of Section 115 of the Clean Air Act has passed the House three times under Republican majorities, twice in the 115th Congress and once in the 114th. To those who view this amendment as premature because the administration has not yet acted under Section 115, the impact was never questioned in the past. I mean, how many times do we have to wake up and say, well, I didn't think they'd do it. I didn't think they would actually defund the police. I didn't think they'd have the IRS show up at the guy's house when he was testifying in Congress. Heaven forbid, I didn't believe they would actually try and ban my gas stove. I thought they were just, kidding around. They didn't really mean it. They do mean it. We know the administration is going to do so because the radical environmental groups that control their agenda have come out and said it. Here's a couple examples. The League of Conservation Voters. While there has been limited use of Section 115, numerous scholars have advocated for its use as a pathway to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, particularly since the Paris Agreement. That's a quote. How about Foreign Policy for America? This amendment would undermine EPA's authority for its potential future application to greenhouse gases. Yeah, we want to undermine their authority and make the authority of the states preeminent. The authority of citizens should be preeminent. Preemptively removing this authority from the administration before they can act is vital to U.S. sovereignty and our economic well-being. I urge support for this amendment, and I reserve the balance.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to claim time in opposition to the Perry Amendment.
Gentleman is recognized.
A common refrain, Mr. Chairman, that I hear from Republicans is that unilateral action by the United States to reduce greenhouse gases would harm our economy and wouldn't move the needle on reducing global emissions. And the core of this argument is that if we're going to address climate change, we need a coordinated international response. Of course, this argument completely falls apart when you take a look at the actions of the House Republicans. Many cheered as the previous administration removed the United States from the Paris Agreement, exiting the largest international agreement to combat global climate change not only weakened our diplomatic standing abroad, but it made it abundantly clear that Republicans don't care about addressing climate change. Now, thankfully, President Biden rejoined the Paris Agreement, putting that embarrassing chapter behind us, but it appears that House Republicans want to go back to burying their heads in the sand when it comes to combating climate change, as made clear by this amendment. This amendment would repeal Section 115 of the Clean Air Act, which provides EPA with a tool to address air pollution while promoting international cooperation to combat climate change. As my Republican colleagues they know by now, air pollution does not respect boundaries, whether these are state or international. And Section 115 provides the EPA administrator the authority to set limits on an air pollutant that is harming public health and welfare in another country, as long as the other country grants reciprocal rights to the United States. So the gentleman's amendment would remove this discretionary authority, gutting our ability to cooperate with our neighbors. We have agreements with Canada, with Mexico, and we show leadership with the international community by working with our neighbors to try to deal with air pollution. But it's a global problem. We need to work with other nations, like we work with Canada and Mexico, and provide the leadership to encourage international engagements to tackle this crisis. But I mean, I guess have to say, I don't believe the Republican majority wants to act on climate crisis internationally or domestically. Case in point, the Polluters Over People Act that we're dealing with today attempts to repeal popular provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, the Methane Emissions Reduction Program, and $4.5 billion in home electrification rebates. Now, House Democrats took historic action to combat the climate crisis by passing the Inflation Reduction Act, which included unparalleled investments in climate and clean energy. Not a single House Republican voted for it. But if we can't act domestically and we can't act in coordination with our neighbors, even Canada and Mexico, what are we going to do to address the threat caused by the climate crisis? And according to this amendment, the answer is apparently nothing. We're not going to do anything domestically. We're not going to do anything with our neighbors. We're not going to do anything internationally. We're going to do nothing. And I just think that's unacceptable. At a time of real crisis, as highlighted by the recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, we should empower EPA to combat dangerous climate change and strongly encourage other nations to do the same. We shouldn't be taking any tools off the table, and that's what this amendment does. It takes the tool off the table. So I urge a no vote on this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
So I know he wants to speak favorably about me, so I'm going to yield to such time as he may consume to the gentleman from North Dakota.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I start, I would just like to point out it sounds like we want to cooperate with our foreign neighbors when it comes to environment control, but we don't want to import energy from them, or we don't want to export energy to them, and I find that a little bit ironic. That being said, I regretfully stand in opposition to this amendment. After Congress reviewed and preserved the Clean Air Act in 1977, it did play an important role in cross-border pollution issues of the late 70s with Canada. And before we strike an entire section of the Clean Air Act involving air pollutants, the Committee of Jurisdiction should examine the issue. The Committee of Jurisdiction should examine the issues, particularly to make sure we avoid any unintended consequences. For example, we should make sure that striking this section does not undermine the ability of the to reduce international air emissions that harm the United States. I commit to working with my friend from Pennsylvania to take this through regular order, but I'm a big fan of the committee process, and let's see that it works. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania, your time has expired. Gentleman from New Jersey.
The gentleman yielded back. I do the same and obviously oppose the amendment.
Gentleman,